It began on an ordinary Wednesday morning in a quiet Colorado suburb. Ava stood in the sunlit living room, folding fresh laundry into neat stacks, when her stepson, Mason, called from the hallway. "Ava, can you help me with this?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. She turned to find him near the staircase, tugging at a stubborn belt looped awkwardly through his cargo shorts. The leather was twisted and the buckle jammed. "Sure, let me see," she said, placing the towels aside and stepping toward him. She crouched slightly to get a better angle, gently tugging the belt free from the metal clasp. "Still stuck," she muttered, focusing. Then, a snap. The belt came loose, and with it, his shorts dropped to the floor. Time stilled. Ava's eyes flicked downward before she quickly looked away. Mason stood frozen, his cheeks crimson. "Ah, I'm sorry," he stammered, fumbling to pull his shorts up. Ava stepped back, her heart racing, unsure what to say. "It's fine. Accidents happen," she replied, flustered. Mason bolted upstairs, leaving Ava alone, shaken. A single accidental moment, but something in the air had shifted. What had once been a peaceful household would soon become anything but. Ava tried to brush the moment off, convincing herself it was nothing. Just a fluke, a slip, an awkward accident. But in the days that followed, she couldn't deny the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house. Every glance between her and Mason felt loaded. Every silence felt louder. Her marriage to Daniel had become a routine of politeness and distance. Married at 46, Ava had found comfort in Daniel's stability after a painful divorce. But over the years, that stability had hardened into cold predictability. Daniel's time was mostly spent on his construction business, early morning golf rounds, and long evenings glued to sports or work calls. They rarely talked beyond dinner logistics. Mason had moved in just a month earlier, Daniel's son from a previous marriage. He was 25, with an unused film degree and no clear path ahead. His mother had remarried and moved across the country, leaving Mason adrift. Daniel offered him a place to stay while he figured things out. Ava hadn't objected. The house was spacious, and truthfully, she had grown tired of the loneliness. But she hadn't expected Mason to be different. He wasn't the awkward teenager she remembered from holiday visits. Now he was taller, leaner, more confident in an understated way. He had a quiet intensity about him, a way of seeing people that made them feel exposed and important at the same time. One morning, Ava was pruning the small flower garden in their backyard when Mason stepped outside barefoot, a mug in hand, shirt half buttoned. "You're always out here," he said, voice groggy. "It's peaceful," Ava replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Mason leaned on the doorframe, smiling slightly. "Daniel never notices the little things, does he?" Ava looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said quickly, sipping his coffee. But it wasn't nothing. Later that week, Ava found Mason in the den, sketching on the edge of an old newspaper. She peeked over his shoulder. "You draw?" Mason hesitated, then handed her the paper. On it, a stunning pencil rendering of the backyard garden, capturing the light and shadows in haunting detail. "This is incredible," Ava said, genuinely impressed. "No one's ever told me that," Mason replied. His voice was soft, vulnerable. That night, Ava found herself staring at the ceiling, sleep elusive. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Mason, his voice, his eyes, that look he gave her in the garden. It made her feel seen, something she hadn't felt in years. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was when Ava realized she was waiting for his footsteps outside her door. It was when she caught herself wearing lipstick before coming down for coffee. It was when she stopped correcting him when he called her Ava instead of stepmom. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow drift toward danger, toward a line she never thought she'd cross. But it was there, and she could feel herself getting closer. And deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. It was a rainy Thursday evening when everything started to spiral. Ava stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing dishes as the scent of roasted rosemary chicken lingered in the air. Outside, thunder cracked softly in the distance. She didn't hear Mason enter at first, not until he spoke, his voice low and uncertain behind her. Ava, she turned, her breath hitching slightly. His hair was damp from a shower, and he looked freshly shaken, like he'd been wrestling with something all day. Yes? She asked, her fingers still wet, heart thumping. He hesitated, then stepped closer. About the other day, the belt thing. I haven't stopped thinking about it. She froze. Mason, she whispered, shaking her head gently. We can't talk about that. It was nothing. Just a weird accident. He didn't budge. It wasn't nothing, at least not for me. Ava's throat tightened. You're confused, she replied, barely above a whisper. This is your father's house. I'm his wife. I know, Mason said, voice barely steady. But that doesn't make what I feel go away. The weight of his words wrapped around the room like fog. Ava could feel her pulse in her ears. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, the front door opened. Daniel's voice rang out. I forgot my phone charger. Did you see it? Mason stepped back instantly, retreating like a shadow disappearing in the dark. Ava turned toward the sink, trying to look casual as her heart pounded like a drum. In the office, maybe, she called, forcing cheer into her tone. Daniel grunted in acknowledgement, his footsteps trailing upstairs. The moment was shattered, but the damage had already been done. That night, Ava sat in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She kept replaying Mason's voice in her head, those 5 words, that doesn't make it go away. She didn't know what terrified her more, the fact that he had said it, or the fact that she felt the same. The next day, she avoided him. She stayed busy in the garden, rearranged the living room bookshelves, even cleaned the garage. But no matter how much she distracted herself, Mason lingered in her thoughts. That evening, he found her on the porch, nursing a cup of tea. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her. Their silence said more than words could. Then it happened. He reached out, gently brushing her hand with his fingers. She should have pulled away. Instead, she let her hand rest there. The air grew heavy with something unspoken. Then slowly, Mason leaned in. Ava didn't move. Her lips parted, her breath shallow, and just before their mouths met, the porch light flicked on. Daniel stood at the window watching them. They jerked apart. Ava scrambled to her feet, the tea spilling over. Daniel's silhouette disappeared from the glass without a word, but they both knew. Something had changed. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the house. The days that followed were drenched in silence. Daniel never brought up what he saw, or what he thought he saw, but Ava could feel the tension crackling in every room like static. He became quieter, colder. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, and his questions came with an edge she hadn't heard in years. Did Mason say if he's looking for a place yet? He asked one morning, his voice calm, too calm. No, she replied, avoiding his gaze. Daniel nodded, saying nothing more. But the way he tapped his fingers against the table made her stomach twist. Mason, too, had changed. He stopped trying to talk to her. He stopped sitting near her at dinner, stopped making coffee in the morning like he used to. He barely looked her in the eye. It was as if, in one flick of the porch light, the fragile illusion they had built came crashing down. But Ava couldn't stop thinking about that almost kiss, about how, in those few seconds, she felt something more real than she'd felt in years. Was it wrong? Of course it was, but it also felt alive. She began to see her life in a different light. Her marriage, once seen as a refuge from pain, now felt like a cage built from politeness and routine. Daniel had always been a good man in the practical sense. He paid bills on time, kept his word, and never raised his voice. But love, passion, attention, those things had dried up long ago. It wasn't just that Mason made her feel desired, it was that he made her feel seen. One afternoon, she found herself in the attic, sorting through boxes of old photographs. She stumbled upon a picture of her younger self, smiling freely, sunlight in her eyes, standing on a beach with wind in her hair. She touched the frame, her fingers trembling. Where had that woman gone? She barely recognized herself anymore, always walking on eggshells, always hiding. She had spent years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother, the perfect hostess. And in all that perfection, she had lost her voice. Now the truth clawed at her like something feral. Her life wasn't full, it was silent. That evening, as she sat alone in the library with the fire quietly crackling beside her, Mason appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough, "for putting you in this position." Ava looked up, her eyes soft. "You didn't put me here. I walked in willingly." He stepped inside, the light flickering against his face. "So, what do we do now?" Ava didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the dark sky. Somewhere a storm was building. "I don't know," she finally said, "but pretending nothing happened isn't working." Mason sat beside her. Their shoulders barely touched. Neither of them said another word. But in that silence, Ava realized something. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Whatever came next, confession, destruction, freedom, it had already begun. 2 weeks later, Ava received a call that would shift the ground beneath her feet. It was from Helena, an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. They'd met in college, drifted apart after marriage and life obligations. But Helena had recently taken a position as creative director at a nonprofit arts center upstate. And she remembered that Ava once dabbled in community programs and public events. "We're opening a new branch near Aspen," Helena said, "and we're looking for someone with your kind of heart. I know this is out of the blue, but would you ever consider a fresh start?" Ava stared out the window, heart racing. A fresh start. The words wrapped around her like a warm coat after a long storm. Later that evening, she sat with Mason in the quiet glow of the den. The television was on, but neither of them was watching. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. There might be an opportunity, a real one, something far away from all this. Mason's eyes lit up. "Where?" "Upstate. It's a small town, quiet. The job isn't glamorous, but it's mine if I want it." A long silence stretched between them before he finally said, "Then take it. We can leave together, start fresh." His words stirred something wild and reckless in her. "You'd come with me?" she asked. "In a heartbeat," he replied. Ava felt a surge of emotion, equal parts hope and terror. It was insane, irresponsible, but also thrilling. The next morning, as she watered the front yard, Daniel approached her. "You've been different lately," he said, arms crossed. I've been thinking, Ava replied carefully, about doing something for myself for once. Such as, there's a job offer, a nonprofit, out of town. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And you're telling me this. Why? Because I think I might take it. He stared at her, stunned into silence. Finally, he muttered, Is this about Mason? Ava's heart skipped a beat. No, she lied. This is about me. Daniel didn't push. He turned and walked inside, leaving her alone with the truth that he wasn't ready to say aloud. Meanwhile, Mason was already packing. If this is our way out, we have to take it, he said. I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder. But not everyone was ready to let them go. Claire, Daniel's sharp-eyed colleague, stopped by later that day, pretending to drop off paperwork. Her voice was sweet, her smile tighter than usual. I heard you're considering a move, she said. Daniel seems concerned. Ava bristled. It's just a job. Claire leaned in, her eyes cold. You should know. Daniel's not the only one who's suspicious, and secrets have a funny way of crawling into the light. Ava forced a smile. Thanks for the warning. But her pulse betrayed her. The opportunity was there. Freedom dangled just out of reach. But now the question loomed large. Would they make it out before the truth exploded? The night before she was supposed to leave, Ava stood at her bedroom window, staring out into the stillness. The garden was bathed in silver moonlight, the roses gently swaying in the breeze. Her sanctuary for so many years, now just a memory of the life she was about to leave behind. She had packed a single suitcase, not because she didn't own more, but because she realized how little she truly needed. Her hands trembled as she zipped it shut. Mason waited for her outside, seated on the front steps with his hood up and duffel bag at his feet. He looked younger than ever, vulnerable, hopeful. And yet there was something about his presence that didn't anchor her. It pulled her forward, tugging her out of a life where she'd been invisible. But before she could join him, Daniel called out, Ava, we need to talk. She turned to see him standing in the hallway, the expression on his face unreadable. He gestured to the study. Wordlessly, she followed him in. He closed the door and sat behind his desk, fingers steepled. I know. Ava's breath caught. Know what? Don't insult me, he said, voice calm but cutting. I've known for a while. The way you look at him, the way he looks at you. She swallowed hard. Daniel, I don't want an explanation, he interrupted. I just want you to ask yourself something. What are you chasing? Ava didn't answer. Is it love, escape, youth? Daniel continued. Because whatever it is, it's costing you your soul. His words pierced deeper than she expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they came from the one person who had once promised her safety. And now even he saw through her. I'm not proud of what I've done, Ava whispered, voice shaking, but I refuse to live numb anymore. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her. Then go. But don't pretend you're a victim of your circumstances. You made this choice. And just like that, Ava saw her reflection in full clarity. Not the neglected wife, not the swept-away lover, but a woman who had reached a breaking point and burned the bridge behind her. Outside, Mason stood as she stepped onto the porch. You okay? He asked. Ava nodded, though her heart felt heavy. He knows. Mason clenched his jaw. So, are we doing this? She looked at him, at the car waiting in the driveway, at the night swallowing up the edges of their quiet neighborhood. I don't know if this is right, she said honestly, but I know I can't stay. He reached out his hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. They drove into the darkness without speaking. But as the town lights faded in the rearview mirror, Ava felt something shift within her. Not peace, not joy, just clarity. She was no longer waiting for someone to rescue her. She was choosing herself. 3 months later, Ava stood on the porch of a modest cabin nestled in the pines of Ridgevale, a sleepy town flanked by mountains and memory. The wind here felt different, cleaner, quieter, untouched by the chaos she left behind. The nonprofit job wasn't glamorous, but it filled her days with purpose. She worked with local artists, helped organize community shows, and curated spaces where people could express what she had spent years suppressing, feeling. Mason had stayed for a while. At first, their days were filled with whispered mornings, passionate nights, and dreams of building something real. But dreams, Ava discovered, are often made for a different version of yourself. He grew restless. She grew honest. Eventually, he left. Not in anger, not in heartbreak, but with a mutual understanding that their connection had been born of escape, not foundation. He drove away in the same car they'd fled in, promising to figure things out on his own. Ava watched him disappear into the winding roads without tears, because for the first time in years, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt free. Letters came from Daniel, short, polite, never bitter. He had filed for divorce quietly without confrontation. Ava signed the papers in her tiny office, sealing the past with a calm she never imagined she'd find. Claire, ever the opportunist, had taken more interest in Daniel's affairs after Ava's departure. Rumors trickled in, but Ava let them float by like fallen leaves in the creek behind her new home. That life was no longer hers. In Ridgevale, Ava became someone else. Not because she ran away, but because she had finally run toward herself. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. Her pieces weren't perfect, but they were raw, honest, real. Locals took notice. Someone offered to hang her work in the library. Another invited her to teach a class at the community center. And so she did. She taught women who felt invisible, teens who didn't know how to process pain, men who'd lost everything and needed to find something to hold on to. In helping them find their voice, Ava found her own. She no longer needed validation from stolen glances or late-night whispers. She had built a life of intention. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the evergreens, casting long shadows over her porch, she sat with a mug of tea and a paintbrush in hand. A fresh canvas waited on the easel before her. She didn't know what the painting would become, but for once, that didn't scare her, because her life no longer needed a title or a perfect frame. It was hers to color, stroke by imperfect stroke. As she dipped her brush into the first color, Ava smiled softly. She had once been a woman trapped in silence. Now she was the author of her own noise. And in that freedom, she found everything she thought she'd lost. Sometimes the most powerful transformation begins with a single, painful choice, the decision to no longer live half alive. Ava's journey wasn't just about forbidden love. It was about rediscovering herself after years of invisibility. For so long, she had settled into the role expected of her: a good wife, a quiet homemaker, a stepmother who stayed in her lane. But inside, she was unraveling, starving for connection, for passion, for purpose. Her story reminds us that life isn't meant to be endured. It's meant to be felt, and feeling, even when it's messy and uncertain, is often the gateway to healing. Ava didn't run away to be with someone else. she left to finally be with herself. Growth isn't always pretty. Sometimes it begins with shame. Sometimes it's born from mistakes, but it's still growth. And if you're brave enough to face your truth, even when it breaks things apart, you just might find the version of you that was always waiting underneath. Ava's story is fictional, but her struggle is all too real. Many people, especially women in midlife, find themselves trapped in roles they no longer recognize. They stay in marriages, careers, or homes not out of joy, but out of fear. Fear of change, fear of judgment, fear of starting over. But starting over is not a failure. It's a declaration of worth. If you find yourself longing for something more, don't silence that voice. Explore it. Talk to a therapist. Join a creative class. Have honest conversations with yourself. You don't have to burn everything down like Ava did, but you do have to be honest about what's not working. Your happiness matters. Your dreams don't have an expiration date, and it's never too late to rewrite your story with you at the center this time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and share with your friends. Your support keeps these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And if today's story touched your heart, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take care, stay well, and see you in the next story.